Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the final of 5 Adults with Disabilities webinars hosted by ASA Florida and the Florida Department of Education. I'm Dave Barnes, Projects Coordinator for ASA Florida. Please note you will be muted throughout the webinar. If you have questions, please place them in the chat and we'll do our best to get to them, time permitting. Earlier today, you were sent a professional development form and a link to the webinar feedback. If you need to document your participation in these webinars, please fill out the form and return it to me at dave@asaflorida.org. I'll pop that into the chat later. You can list all of the sessions in which you have participated on one form. Excuse me. We would greatly appreciate your providing feedback on the webinar as well through the link provided. This has been an amazing series of webinars about the use of AI with our adult education students. One more final time, we are pleased to have Dr. Jenny Root with us. Jenny is an associate professor of special education in Ann's College at Florida State University and an affiliate faculty with the Florida Center for Reading Research. Her research focuses on teaching meaningful academic skills to students with autism and intellectual disability. She was the 2025 recipient of the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers from President Biden. And one last time, Jenny, we welcome you, and the screen is yours.
Thanks so much. I'm excited to be with you all. All right, so welcome to the last part of our webinar series. I was looking at last year's webinar series when we also ended with assessment. And I always struggle with the timing and order of the topics because while we might think of assessment last, in some ways it actually should be thought of first in instructional design, but we have to start somewhere. So this is our final webinar for this year's series. And so I've got a bit of some review slides here, and I'll plug some of the other videos that we've had along the way. So let's start again with a review. Curious to see how much you remember. So in the first webinar, the intro to AI and sort of the overview, we talked about how I prefer to think of AI as automation based on association rather than artificial intelligence. But the overall big bubble, artificial intelligence, just refers to the ability of a machine to imitate intelligent human behavior. And we have been using AI in our society for a very long time. What really intensified the innovation was the application of machine learning. And so that's where we take AI and the system can automatically learn and improve from experience. And then finally, the most recent developments in AI are related to deep learning. And that's where we don't have to train everything that the model does. It can learn from itself and improve. In the next webinar, we talked about accessibility, which will come back up again today. And so I wanted to differentiate between accessibility, accommodations, and assistive technology. So accessibility is just referring to the environments, which can be the physical space that you're in, but also the learning environment, the materials, the expectations. And it's designing it proactively so that it is usable for everyone from the start. So things are embedded already. For example, closed captions automatically play. Or even text to speech or speech to text. It's there for anyone to use should they want to. As opposed to accommodations, which are reactive. Those are given in specific response to a student's needs. So for example, a student with dyslexia may need the math test read aloud. And so those are changes that are made, again, to meet an individual's specific needs. Often those are going to be specified in a student's official accommodations from like a disability resource center. And then finally, there's assistive technology. Many types of accessibility features that we use now that are just universally available started out as assistive technology specifically for people with disabilities. And then with the magic of UDL, we knew that we shouldn't have to request or put something special onto a computer for it to have text to speech, for example, if that's going to benefit everyone. And there are many laws that cover and require accessibility. So in the US, it's a right, not a privilege, to have access to environments, materials, and it depends on some of these laws apply to everyone, the public at large, some apply to public buildings, some apply to institutions of higher education. So there's variety there. So if you're interested in this, we'll go back to the accessibility webinar. Next, we talked about AI for engagement with the really important understanding that we need to have that adults learn differently from children. And teaching adults is far harder than teaching children, in that adults each come into the learning environment with unique experiences, preferences, abilities, goals. And what's so hard about teaching adults is adults only want to learn things that are new, interesting, and relevant to them. Well, that's going to be totally different for every person, right? Versus, while there is, differences in preferences and in cultures and backgrounds, and when we're teaching children, they at least have that almost universal school experience, right? And that need for immediate relevance for their goals is not quite as strong as it is for adults. And so that's why it's important that we're all familiar with and applying principles of andragogy. Next, we talked about executive functions. Executive functions are the set of interrelated cognitive skills that we use to do anything. So to plan, organize, and execute tasks. So you could think like a great big task like building a tree house, or, replacing carpet. But also it can be small tasks like getting dressed, refilling medication. Everything we do in daily life requires executive functioning. And for many people with disabilities, we have executive dysfunction. And so doing things that might seem easy or simple or low effort actually aren't. And so these executive functions take up about 10 to 20% of the activities or things that we do every day in our lives. And so from everything from self-awareness, so putting your attention where it needs to be, through planning and problem solving. All right. So what I'm going to ask you to do now, if you will, is get out a scrap piece of paper. It's something that you can list from numbers 1 through 10. And then I want you, give me about 90 seconds. I want you to write down 10 ways that you've assessed your students this semester. Okay. So keep that list handy. So there are different types of assessments that we give. This is probably a review for most of you, but sometimes it's helpful to go back to basics and really think about the instructional decisions we're making. So we know that we have formative assessments, and those are why I have form underlined, is because we use those to form our future instruction. It's the assessment for learning. It takes place throughout the course, often used to identify any type of gap a student has, with the purpose of, oh, I'm going to assess and get this data, and then I'm going to use that to inform instruction in some way, either to increase the challenge, maybe increase the support, address prerequisite skills. And then we have summative assessments, and that's the purpose being assessment of learning. So generally it's taking place at the end of some sort of instructional period. Could be the end of a unit, the end of a chapter. Certainly we have end of course assessments. And while we can use that to plan for future instruction, that's not really a primary purpose. The primary purpose is to document and have evidence of the student's knowledge, skills, or proficiency to date. So what I would like you to do is go through the 10 assessments that you listed. And I would go through and mark each one of, was that a formative assessment? Was that something that I was doing along the way of instruction to inform future choices, or was it summative? Was it something that I was doing at the end of the instructional period? Okay, so to add on a little bit, we have our formative and summative assessments, but each one of those can be either formal or informal. So formal are those that are structured. They're going to be graded, or if not graded, scored. And somehow they might not necessarily be high stakes, but they are certainly more high stakes than an informal assessment. And they might be standardized. So things like the GED, language assessments, those are going to be standardized. We have to follow the same protocol every time. We get norm reference scores. So it's not a matter of they got 90% correct, right? It's what was their score in relation to others or in relation to some sort of cutoff. Informal assessments then are those that may or may not be graded, but think of as lower stakes occurring organically during instruction. And I think that often they're informal, formative assessments taking place without teachers even like putting that label on what it is they're doing, right? And the great example of that is questioning, right? So if we are, wrapping up having read a text, or maybe we're beginning instruction one day and we want to review prior learning, and we're asking stimulating questions, that is a form of informal formative assessment. You're taking in what the students are saying and using that to judge, like, oh, they're on the right track, or oh, there might be some common misconceptions. Maybe we need to review a vocabulary term. Other types of informal assessments might be an observation checklist, discussion, students' journal reflections. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to track and put in a grade book or even write down your impression of the student's performance. It's the act of observing performance of someone to make a decision. And then formal formative assessments are things like graded quizzes. Sometimes you might have a pre-test, post-test type thing. Often online learning modules are great when they have some sort of tracking or questions that they have them ask along the way. In contrast, summative assessments that are formal are the most obviously things like certification tests, standardized end of course tests, essays of some sort of final exam or project. Informal summative assessments might be things like peer reviews of a presentation that was given, or instructor feedback on presentation or essay, or importantly, student self-assessments. So from your list of 10 assessments, you've marked them F and S for formative and summative. Now I'd like you to go through, and you may have already done this, underline the assessments that are formal and circle the ones that were informal. And once you've done that, I would love if you want to unmute and talk, or feel free to put into the chat, what was the makeup of those 10 assessments? Were more of them formative, more of them summative, especially if you're thinking about things you might be doing right now at the end of the semester? Were they more formal? Were they more informal? Again, feel free to unmute or to type into the chat. How did those 10 assessments break down as far as these categories? Yeah, Janaya.
So most of mine, all but one, were formative, and all but two were informal. So most of my assessments are taking place during class, during our live class time, but also some of them are assignments that students are expected to do on their own.
Do you think the students are aware that all of those things are assessments?
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting when I was teaching this course I taught an assessment course here at FSU, and the students took it in their junior year. So they're just starting to learn about being teachers. And one of the interesting reflections was, oh, I didn't realize all those things I was doing was like for a reason, was for a purpose, which is always interesting.
We have a module, a section in a module on active learning, and it talks about formal and formative and summative assessments. So they've seen the examples, whether they make that connection or not. I'm guessing yes.
Good. And Katie says 6 formative and 4 summative, but some are used as both. Yeah, that makes sense. Anyone else want to share? So I think in general, you're going to have a higher proportion of formative than summative, and probably more informal than formal. So we use assessments for a lot of different purposes. The two primary that we've talked about so far are monitoring student progress and making instructional decisions, right? But there is this other gray area, which is the accountability to stakeholders. So that could be accountability to your institution, to the state, to an accrediting agency, accrediting body. Sometimes those are often pulled from those summative assessments. So in today's, as in all the other webinars, I want to explicitly focus not just on like what is assessment and how can AI help, but always wanting to think what exactly are the needs of our adult learners with disabilities, and how are those needs being met or not met by the way that we choose to assess them. So what I mean by centering, or why we should center them, it goes along with the philosophy of universal design for learning, where we're wanting to be proactive. So we want to think about who is it in our classroom that we're designing for. The AI tools are only tools. They're just that. Not necessarily positive or negative. It's how are they being used, but they're only going to be as inclusive and effective as the person using them. We know, we've talked a lot about how adult learners with disabilities face different barriers to showing what they know. That's the way I like to think of assessment. And to use AI effectively for assessment, engagement, instruction, for any of the things we've talked about so far, we need to make sure that we are focusing on how the students are going to experience it, and what their needs are, not just kind of getting caught up in the technology. And I also think that this helps us be a little bit resilient to the whiplash of technology, as there's all these new things are continually coming out. So the focus being on not necessarily how to use a specific tool, but what type of tools should you be looking for? What type of assistance can AI provide, and what should you consider? So I'm going to share this 2 clips from Todd Rose. He's got a very interesting life story. If you ever have a chance to see him speak, I highly recommend it. He came here to Tallahassee, I think last fall, and enjoyed speaking with him. But he has a full-length uh, uh, TED Talk on the myth of average. And this is like segments of him talking on that topic.
We are, in the United States, one of the most diverse countries in the history of the world. That's a tremendous asset. We know that's an asset. To this day, we still accept more immigrants in this country than the rest of the world combined. It's astounding, right? And we should be even more accepting of that. But here's the thing. In this kind of environment, once again, the myth of the average is going to hurt us worse, because it leads us to create environments that work against what are our three greatest assets: the focus on the individual, our diversity, and our capacity for innovation. And another thing that really bothers me, where this average is really harming us, is in the way we assess learning. Not only in a school, but think about our love affair right now with global comparisons. It says the United States is falling behind on measures of things on average. I'm not saying that's good. I am saying that may not be the right way to think about it. You know, when we compare ourselves to places like Finland, I love Finland. It's a great country. They should be applauded for their success. But they are 5 million people. They have a deep commitment to equality of educational opportunity. And they have roughly 3% of their students live at poverty or below. In the United States, on average, it's 24%. When you disaggregate the United States data by districts that only have 10% less poverty level, those districts outperform everybody else in the world by a long shot. So it may not be an issue of average performance. It's an issue of unequal access to quality resources. But then when we get so focused on improving the average, it leads us to do things, to use our resources in ways that may be counterproductive. So I think that the secret is not to try to win on average, but redefine this, to think about judging ourselves by our ability to create environments that truly nurture the broadest spectrum of talent possible. And it's a different game, and it will require rethinking a lot of things, but it's possible. It's 1950s, and the Air Force has a problem. They just invested heavily in new jet-powered aviation, with the assumption that they were going to get massive gains in performance from their pilots. But in fact, the opposite was happening. In one day, over 17 pilots crashed. And no one really knew why. They blamed the pilots, they blamed the flight instructors, and then they figured out it was the cockpit. They had built the cockpit around this idea of an average-sized pilot, as defined in the 1920s. They commissioned the largest study at the time of pilot body size to calculate a brand new average-sized pilot. But guess what they found? There actually was not even one single pilot that was average on the dimensions of size that mattered for cockpits. If you designed a cockpit on average, then it actually fit nobody. Once the Air Force figured that out, they banned the use of averages in design, created flexible cockpits, and performance soared. The parallel to education is pretty straightforward. We're still the only industry left that encourages designing to averages, whether it's textbooks, assessments. We even fix the pace and sequence that kids learn, all based on what we know about kids on average. So no wonder we have performance problems in education, but we also know the way forward. If instead we build educational environments to fit each individual, then we can expect the same kind of performance gains and expanded opportunity that the Air Force found.
So I always find that story, every time I hear it, so fascinating that something that maybe on its face sounded about right, in reality, crashed and burned. I don't know if that's the right analogy to use. But what the point that Todd makes, and again, his story is amazing. He dropped out of high school, became a teenage parent, and ended up getting his GED and going all the way through. He has a PhD from Harvard. Certainly that is not the quote unquote average story, but I think through those experiences, he brings a very interesting perspective. And his point being that there is no such thing as somebody who has the average in any human quality, right? Variability is the defining feature of humanity. We vary on different things, and that's what makes the world interesting, but it's also what makes education so hard. And so I have this short video that's going to introduce or review, depending on how many of my webinars you've attended, the Universal Design for Learning framework. and what this looks like specifically for adult learners.
Universal Design for Learning for adult learners. Each learner is unique. In fact, as unique as their fingerprints. Even within a learner, how learning takes place can vary depending on what is being learned, the time of day, or what is going on in their lives. Teachers who use Universal Design for Learning, UDL, understand the importance of celebrating the variability in their learners and ask learners to be an active part, a partner, in their learning process. By learning about your own learning, you can apply this information in many ways throughout your life. Let's get started looking at UDL so you can understand and apply this framework to you and your learning. You can access, understand, and apply what you learn through UDL. When you see how what you are learning is similar to something you already know and could be applied in a valuable way in your life, you will recruit interest. Your brain will be ready to learn when you recruit interest. It's like a flashing billboard telling you to pay attention. When you see, hear, or are able to discuss or use information, then you have valuable perceptions. Having a variety of ways to access information or concepts ensures your brain has many options to fully understand and use this new information with what you already know. One day, you may want to watch a video. Another, you may want to listen to a podcast. And another day, you may want to talk with a friend about what you are learning. These are all ways for our brain to use what you're learning and to give you a better understanding. And you'll be able to remember it. Finally, having options for ways to express yourself to show what you know is another part of UDL. Saying what you know, writing it, drawing a picture, or acting it out are all ways to take action and express what you know. This allows you to use your unique gifts and apply them to your learning, so information has meaning for you. When you practice UDL and think about ways to use it more in your life, you will build your skills and get better at learning. The end goal is for you to internalize these skills and use them all the time, including in your daily life and in work.
Oops. I just wanted to end.
You will build your skills and get better at learning. The end goal is for you to internalize these skills and use them all the time, including in your daily life and in work. Continuing to learn and grow is easier and more rewarding when you know what makes you an expert learner. Think of different ways that you use and get better.
So I don't know if you already drew these connections, but a lot of this webinar series has been based on the UDL framework, even though it didn't always make it explicit, where you can see, let's see, the all about engagement, all about the executive functions, as well as self-regulation. And then today we're going to talk more about the make sure we design things so that we are really assessing what we want to assess and not other things, and that we're doing it in a way that's not going to let someone's disability prevent you from really knowing what they know, or to do our best. So the bottom line of UDL and coming from this perspective is that variability is a part of the human condition, and that's something to be embraced. And it's something to be aware of when you're first designing your instruction and your assessment, not something you think about after the fact in a retroactive way. That will not only not be as effective, it'll be frustrating to you as an instructor and not efficient. So I'm going to go through, I have these guidelines for making sure that our assessments are universally designed and how we can use AI within that. So I have these guiding questions to think about. So if you would like, if it's helpful to keep that checklist out, or the list of 10 assessments to think about as you reflect on these different questions. So the very first thing is, are the learning goals and objectives clear? That doesn't even mean to the students. Are they clear to you? Are you sure exactly what the purposes for learning, the sequence of the objectives in your course. Next, as long as they're clear to you, are they also clear to the student so that they know what it is that they're working on? That's the first step to building goal-directed behavior, is having a goal to direct the behavior towards. And we can't help students to self-assess if they don't know, like, against what benchmark. Second, want to know, do those assessments reflect and measure the intended learning goals? And are there additional components or skills also being measured? That might be okay sometimes. It might not other times. Very common starting point for this is anytime a learning goal or an assessment requires writing, like requires writing a paragraph to like a whole paper or essay. Sometimes writing, the act of producing that product, that is the learning goal. Other times, you might be using an essay or a longer written product as a way to assess content knowledge. For example, understanding of, the Vietnam War, and why do some people call it a war and some people would call it a conflict, right? So what is very difficult for people with disabilities is when you put those two things side by side. And when they are simultaneously having to show what they know in a way that is laborious and difficult, and the content that they're trying to show is new and complex. And so often we want to sort of tease apart those two things. If it's something new and complex content, can we give a little bit more flexibility in how they show what they know? That's a way to increase engagement. So like, maybe this is hard and history is not their thing, or, comparing and contrasting is a difficult skill, but could we make it about a more high interest topic, right? To increase that engagement, or vice versa. If we really want to focus on that social studies content, could we have them show their knowledge and their understanding in a different way, like a speech or photograph, or picture essay, photo voice? Is there a different way they can show what they know? And this alignment triangle is constructive alignment. And so you want to make sure this triangle is always there between what it is we want the students to know or do, how the knowledge or skills are going to be measured, and then the learning activities is, well, how are we going to get from where they are right now to making sure that they're able to show us what they know, that they did in fact learn it. So I'm going to walk you through an example of how to use ChatGPT as one type of generative AI. But first, I want to review what is generative AI, and then talk a little bit about prompt engineering. That's something that I've mentioned in each session, but I want to go a little bit more in depth and then give you a resource, because I've learned as I've gotten better at prompt engineering that you really just have to practice and find the way that it works for you.
What exactly is generative AI? When new content is created by artificial intelligence, it's called generative AI. This could involve generating texts and images, as well as videos, music, or voices. To do this, you describe in a chat dialog box what you want the AI to create. This description is called a prompt. The generative AI tools provide answers to all sorts of questions, summarize complex information, and generate diverse ideas quickly. Depending on how they're used, they can create short stories, paintings, pieces of code, or even musical compositions. The foundation for this creation lies in large amounts of data that the AI system accesses to identify patterns and similarities. The content produced by the AI is new. It's often impressive and challenging to distinguish from things humans have made. Generative AI can also be misused. In so-called deepfakes, AI is utilized to produce images or videos that seem real. AI-generated texts are also tough to recognize as machine-made. Moreover, the AI can provide answers that sound correct but are actually incorrect. This is called hallucinating. The quality of what's created depends on both the quality of the data used and the quality of the prompts given. To effectively utilize generative AI, we need to learn how to guide the tools with meaningful prompts and use them thoughtfully. Generative AI holds immense potential and can help us in many ways, such as serving as a writing or learning partner. However, the AI should do the hard work, and humans should be responsible for the facts. What exactly?
Generative AI puts us in control of entire worlds just waiting to be unlocked, and prompts are our key to unlocking them. Working with generative AI is like working with any collaborative partner. The less information we give someone, the less detailed they're able to be. The more specific we are, the more likely we'll get what we want. And that's what prompt engineering is all about. Designing better prompts so we get better results. Similar to how we learn to search the web, we refine, edit, adjust, and try new things until we find what we're looking for. Eventually, that process becomes second nature, and that's where we're at with generative AI. We're discovering what makes the best prompts, things that are universal, adaptable, and provide AI with the perfect amount of context, so it does things your way.
Okay, so I really appreciated the analogy there of when we learn to search the internet and learn to Google things. My husband sometimes jokes that I'm that, like, he'll ask me something and I'll say, well, the way that I would find that answer is the same way you would. And then he says, but you're better at Googling than me. I don't know if that's the case. But similarly, with the large language models, chatbots, you want to learn how to interact with it to get the best information that you want. So this here is a great open access prompt guide that I found from Dave Burrs. So you can copy down the URL or take a screenshot, but also when Dave sends out the slides, they'll be in there. And so also, probably those of you with smartphones on right now, your social media feeds are going to be full of tips for prompt generation. I feel like I run across them on Instagram all the time. And so one tip is to give it a role. So in that case, it's the character, you are, for mine, it's like you are a associate professor in special education with expertise in blah, blah, blah. And the request is what you want it to do. And the more detailed information you get, the more tailored your output's going to be. And then I just have a running Google Doc of prompts so that I don't have to sit and think and like rework through them over and over. So this is one that I would give. All right, so now thinking about how are we going to use AI for this? I went through ChatGPT this afternoon and asked it to help me break down an assignment into, or excuse me, to make sure that the assessment is aligned with the learning objectives. And what I wish I'd taken a screenshot of what I asked. What I asked was, what would you tell adult educators as far as how you can help them, right? It's confusing, right? So I'm talking to ChatGPT and asking ChatGPT to help you all as the audience, adult educators, know what to tell it. Takes a little bit of mental gymnastics. So this is the instructions it gave to you all. Step one being clarifying the learning goal. So say, help me break down this learning goal into skills or components, and then you would insert the goal. And then it might give you some of these outputs as far as skills to break down. And so I find this a helpful, good starting point, because sometimes we might make assumptions about what skills or pre-skills or component skills that might be required to achieve the learning goal. You can also put in course objectives. Maybe you're not quite at like a lesson objective or lesson goal. Maybe that's not how you plan currently. So you could put in course objectives, unit or chapter objectives, standards that you're meeting, and have it help you break them down. Next, once it's broken that down for you, you'd say, well, suggest assessment types for adult learners with disabilities to demonstrate mastery of identifying a clear topic sentence or using persuasive language. And then it might give you all these different examples of types of assessments. You can also give it specific parameters. So going back to the prompt engineering, you can say like, do not require writing, or give options for writing and speaking, or what have you. Give options that don't require access to Wi-Fi or don't require access to technology if that's a barrier for your students. So in this way, I think that generative AI is an excellent thought partner. Probably rarely would you ever use exactly what it gave you, exactly the way it gave it to you, right? But it's that stimulating in thoughts, and then you go from there. The next step is, well, help me make a rubric or a checklist that clearly shows how does this assessment align with the learning objectives. That is one of my least favorite things to do. It's also one of my least favorite things to teach because it's hard and requires just lots and lots of examples and non-examples. So one way that ChatGPT or any LLMs like this can just speed it up, but it still requires the human oversight and a knowledgeable human to be able to look and say, oh yeah, that's what I meant, or no, this rubric isn't what I meant to use. But you can specify also the type of rubric, and we'll talk about rubrics some more in a bit. But you can say, make it a 2-column rubric of meets expectations, does not meet expectations. Put it on a 5-point scale. You could have it align with the way that your high stakes tests are scored, for example. Okay, so now we know we have the learning goals, ways that we could assess them, rubrics, and then now the assessment prompt. What they mean by that are the directions. Like, what directions are you going to give to your students? So the prompt you put in is to generate that, include simple language, give me options for different formats. And then here's an example output. You can also ask for for it to break it down for you. So not just give me the directions, but maybe break down what are the steps for this. So it could be first they fill out a graphic organizer of some sort, or some sort of brainstorming activity, pre-writing. Then maybe it gives them sentence stems or sentence starters or expectations for that paragraph. Next, you could have it guide students through self-assessing their own work with the rubric and then giving it to you. So it's helping to personalize the amount of supports that they need. And then if a student doesn't need those supports, they can disregard them, right? So it makes your differentiation way more efficient than if you're doing everything by hand, unless you're just a wizard at this, but I'm not. And then step 5, you can use it to help check for accessibility and universal design, right? So here you would want to put in the specific characteristics of your students with disabilities to check and make changes. And then finally, you can, what's supposed to be at the end of our learning cycle is reflection and iteration and changing for future. You can use a large language model to help you reflect. So, based on student feedback and performance, but you have to tell it what the feedback and performance was, right? So whether that's maybe copying and pasting scores, uploading rubrics. I often have a running list of comments and feedback to students, especially for courses where I do a similar or the same assignments, and over time students need same or similar feedback. So I kind of generate my own little bank of that and could put that in. And then it might give some suggestions for you. In addition to using a generative AI to kind of walk you through creating your own assessments, there are also increasingly more platforms for that will generate the assessment. So here is an example of Magic School and some of its features.
Hi, welcome to this video on quiz and assessment generator in Magic School AI. So there's a lot of options for generating different types of assessments in the Magic School AI dashboard here. One that's new, you'll see here, is the worksheet generator. You can create a worksheet basically based on any topic or text. So you could attach a PDF. So let's say you've got a PDF of possibly an article that you want to read, or maybe it's a PDF from a curricular resource that you have. You could attach that here using this attach button. You can also paste a block of text, tell it the grade level. You can also click the microphone and you can describe the unit as recording. My unit is about the Civil War, specifically the role that medical staff like nurses and doctors played. So you can actually, instead of typing, you could describe, okay, what's there. It's going to listen to you. Okay, so there's options there, and then you can generate your worksheet. Multiple choice assessments. Again, you can choose the number of questions that you'd like, the grade level. Again, you could copy paste text, you could attach, you could say, I want a vocabulary quiz for these words, a diagnostic assessment, and then generate. Again, more specific, the better, if you can list the steps.
So, and then DIFIT is another example. And then Janai also brought up Brisk. They have their own quirks and benefits, but it's amazing how competitive they are with each other, which is benefiting us of the tools getting better and better.
This resource is to demonstrate how to create.
She talks so
DIFIT
slow. We gotta.
assessment. First, you'll need to go to diffit.me. Click where it says Teachers Start Here. You'll also need to make sure that you sign in through your Gmail, your Madison City Gmail. You will go ahead based on Animal Farm. I'm going to select the grade level, which is 9th grade. I'm not going to have the entire book, but it's going to have an adapted reading passage, as you can see here.
So the great thing about DIFIT that she wanted to show is that the leveled and adapted texts, and then it suggests some formative assessments or learning activities to go along with it. For time, we're gonna keep going. So the next important thing to think about when we're universally designing assessments is to make sure that it's authentic. This is important for K-12 learners as well as adults, but based on what we know about andragogy and how adults learn, we know that it needs to be relevant to them, relevant, and they need to have that ability for problem solving, along with scaffolds or supports from problem solving. So authentic assessments is when you want to judge students' knowledge based on a real world context. Now, often it is simulating a real world context, right? But we want to be realistic, requires judgment. Students have to do something. Sometimes this is called problem-based learning, inquiry-based learning. It assesses their ability to navigate the complex tasks, things that aren't clear-cut decisions. What can make this, what we have to be careful about is that we have built up all of the knowledge and skills that students will need in order to engage in this critical thinking. So we think about Bloom's taxonomy, we want to make sure that they've had learning experiences related to understanding and remembering and applying information before we're expecting them to evaluate and create and analyze, or that we have embedded some supports for that. So here's an example going back to using ChatGPT or any of the other generative AI language models. So here's the prompt, and you can see here all the fill in the blanks. So you tell the chat that you are an expert teacher, proficient in developing innovative and effective authentic assessments that enable the student to develop and exhibit their learning. Your task is to create however many of whatever type of assessments for the class. They should measure the content standard, emphasize real-world application, complex tasks, varied formats, and meaningful feedback, all those qualities. And then you can insert any of these do not. While this series, and especially today, is really focusing on using AI for assessment as the teacher, so like AI tools to assist you in assessing students, I think we need to acknowledge the obvious elephant in the room that students are also going to try to use AI to complete the assessments. Probably need a whole other webinar on that and how to teach students to use it responsibly and ethically, because I don't know about your experience, but I can tell when someone used AI. It's got very predictable I call it flavors. And so one way to protect against that is to make this so specifically real world. And also if they have to like make connections to their own personal experiences or, discussion in class, you make it require something that LLM does not have knowledge of. And so here's an example of the prompt for looking at ninth grade English class, doing an author study on Maya Angelou. And you can see here, be creative and unique. Do not use any essay options. The next component of universally assigned assessment is making sure that we are not only assessing content knowledge, but also engagement. So a quick review back to our engagement webinar, we talked about that there are 3 dimensions of engagement for adult learners. There's behavioral engagement. So like, that's the most obvious one. Are you participating? Are you persevering through participation? Cognitive engagement of like that depth of learning and critical thinking, and then affective engagement. Do you have the motivation and confidence? And we need to have supports here for all of that, particularly when doing authentic assessments that require problem solving, where there's some inherent productive struggle that might happen. I really like and have found value in using and teaching emotion words to my students. So I do this with my doctoral students in our weekly lab meetings where we do like check-ins to see how we're feeling. It's been particularly helpful this semester with all the events that have given us all the emotions and feelings, to be able to identify, very specifically, what is it that we're feeling? Why, and just being able to name it helps us move on, and also helps acknowledge. I'm trying to model that none of us are robots who do work in a vacuum. We don't learn in a vacuum. We don't live in a vacuum. And as Daniel Tiger says, there's nothing wrong with the way we feel. It's what we do about it. And so this is coming from the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. I was most familiar with the feelings wheel. If you've seen that, I really like the feelings wheel also. But what this does is it sort of sorts emotions by your energy level and pleasantness. So after this research done by Yale, they created an app. So it started out as being called Mood Meter. And then I've also seen it called, nope, it's still called Mood Meter. How I Feel is the other thing I've seen it feel.
When people who care about you ask how you're doing, how equipped are you to answer them accurately? For so many of us, the realm of our feelings is a foreign land, and finding the language to talk about them is mystifying. When we learn to better understand and use specific words to describe what we feel, we can develop a kinder relationship with our emotions. In other words, we can learn to work with what's happening rather than avoid, suppress, or deny it. Imagine being alone on a ship lost at sea with no instruments to guide you. You'd be confused, afraid, and disoriented, unable to ask for help. Now imagine you've located a map and a compass. You now have the ability to locate where you are and determine the best direction to steer your ship. Your feelings are your GPS. If you can learn to identify them accurately, you can better orient yourself in the present moment and make better and healthier decisions. By checking in daily with yourself and asking how.
Okay, so you can, I believe when I looked this up, it was 99 cents to download, but you don't have to have the the benefit of it is if you regularly use it, it starts to predict maybe how you'll feel. And then it also gives you suggested very brief videos or, things to do, breathing exercises, mindfulness exercises to go along with it. So that's going to support both executive functioning, because remember, when we are dysregulated, that part of our brain is not working. And then also to help us think about becoming more aware of how we feel during different activities, right? So the student can maybe start to advocate for themselves. Not that we don't do things that are difficult, but maybe if we're having a day or there are other life circumstances going on, we can be aware of it and then not feel badly. Okay, and the last thing to emphasize are exit tickets. So having frequent formative assessments. There are many different forms of exit tickets. It's simply a public acknowledgement of a student's idea or current thinking. We can use them to make adaptations. That's why they're formative assessments, and give voice to the student, a way for us, in a sort of a low risk way, for us to find out what the students are thinking and what their knowledge is. So there are many different formats, and they can be public or private. So you could have like a big chart paper where everyone has a sticky note and they put their sticky note on it. Or it could be something private done individually in notebooks or discussion boards or what have you. So there is an AI exit ticket generator. Is there not an AI for everything? So this is, I know that many of the other tools I've shown you do this as well. Here's just an additional one called SlidesGo. And so I put in this afternoon, I said, describe the difference. So here's the lesson. It was focusing on describing the difference between formative and summative assessments and giving examples of each. And so here are, this should be behind, but here are the multiple exit ticket exercises it gave me as options. So for example, having true or false next to the statements, that would be a super quick way to assess. You could also have something about, writing a short answer, create a simple chart that has the examples of them. I prefer to give students multiple options for exit tickets that generally all address the same thing. Next, when we talk about reducing unnecessary barriers to access, I'm just going to point you back to the accessibility webinar. But just as we want to think about accessibility in the learning environment, in assessments, it's really important. And now I know that the accessibility of some of those high stakes, formal, standardized assessments are beyond our control. But the informal or the teacher created things are within our control. And we can also teach students how to use those embedded accessibility tools in order to be successful on assessments. Because they may have features that either we don't know about or the student doesn't know about. So let's teach them to use the tools that they do have access to. All right, and the very last tip is looking at how to use and share rubrics to clarify expectations. So I did not know that rubrics were so controversial, but apparently among my colleagues in the School of Future Ed, it is. Some people feel very strongly about using them, and some people feel very strongly about not. I'm in the very strongly about using them camp, where I feel like we need to make expectations explicit so students know, again, that's the first step of goal-directed behavior. It's also more inclusive because it's not assuming that we all have the same conceptualization of what a good paragraph is, or what does it mean to show your work in a word problem. I want to give very clear examples and non-examples. So we want students to have them before the assignment begins, even if you know that you're going to have maybe a bigger project. Introducing the rubric and the bigger project as the learning is taking place, so that they kind of have this in mind, like, oh, I'm going to need this in order to be able to design XYZ. And we can tailor students, we can tailor rubrics and differentiate with them. For time purposes, I'm not going to show this video, but you'll have the link to it, and it goes through use several different AI tools to create rubrics. And finally, I have taken advantage of using this semester with my students, is rubrics for use of AI. So there are many different ones out there. Finally, it took a little while, But versus pretending like AI is something like bad or cheating or something they shouldn't be using, instead, let's teach students when is it appropriate to use AI, because it may be that some assignments you give, you are expecting them to use this, right? But then there might be a time where no, you shouldn't use it at all, right? And giving examples. I have a color system that I use similar to this. And then I appreciated this alignment to blooms. So it's another way to think, what are my learning objectives? What level of blooms are those reflecting? My assessment, what level of blooms is that reflecting? And then what does that mean about the type of AI that they may be using? Because similar to here, we may want to just use AI as the study tool all the way to fully embracing it. Okay, well, that's it for AI for assessment. And I have really enjoyed the webinar series and getting to see some familiar faces. And hopefully I'll get the chance to see you again next year.
Jenny, thank you so much for the last 5 months, the last 5 webinars. We really appreciate it. On behalf of ASA Florida, I want to thank all of you for your participation. I will remind you that you can submit your professional development forms to me, Dave, at asaflorida.org. And please, please, please take a moment and select the evaluation feedback instrument and let us know how we did. Again, thank you all for participating. Jenny, thank you. And you all enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope you have a successful school year. Take care.